South Carolina has a lot of cracks in its road, and Louisiana's are kind of wavy, so our standards will require you to have a few cracks and waves in your roads, just like the other states, to even it out. Would we have done that? That's crazy. Well, education is the road to our children's future. And the standards direct that road. And the way it is right now, if there's a bridge that's out in those standards, guess what? We can't change it. We can't build it back without permission from that consortium, from those consortiums of states that have signed on to that grant. You're locked into it until that grant expires. Now, when it expires, you can change it. And let me give you an example of how this works. This morning, I was down at the Department of Education, anticipating the day, the review of our standards, and there'll be a date when that grant expires and we can change those standards. Those are the people that can address that. I saw them. I talked to them. I met them. I looked them in the eye. I told them what I thought. And they listened to me. But today, if we had to change something right now, right this minute, in those Common Core standards, where do I go? I can go maybe to the state board. Maybe they know where the office is up in Washington, or maybe it's Wichita, Kansas. I don't know which state the consortium is in. The point is this. I do not have the ability to go exercise my right to express my opinions and state what I think about our standards in Georgia right now to the people that have the power to control and that set those standards. And that's why this is an issue of governance. And that is something that we need to retain in Georgia once this grant expires. We do need to work on our standards. We do need to have good standards, but we need to retain the sole right and the authority to address those standards. We need to have the flexibility, the ability to innovate, the ability to look at what some very successful states have done and bring that to Georgia and create a good pathway for our students.
Dr. Wright-Brown, please. You're next.
Senator Liam, I really do agree with a lot of what you said. I think that's exactly the path that we are on. I will tell you that in our application to Race to the Top, we never committed to anything but college and career-ready standards. We have talked often with the Department of Education about whether we had to adhere to the term Common Core. So what we are really working toward is college and career-ready standards, and that's what the GPS was. It was made better by the infusion of the Common Core. But I would like to say to you all tonight, we are starting the endeavor that Senator Liggin just described under the direction of our State Board of Education. And I believe that I can speak for Ms. Kennemore, who's in this audience, for the State Board Chair, Mrs. Hampton, when I say we would love to have you be a part of that process with us. Folks, we've got to unify our efforts for the sake of the teachers and for the children that we serve in this state who deserve the best we can give them. So as we look at the standards, we do need to perfect them and make them strong so that the kids can again have the opportunities that every one of us as parents and grandparents want for our kids here in Georgia. So I don't disagree with much of what he just said, and I invite you to participate in this process with us, and I will be glad to make my email available to you so that you can contact us, and certainly you can do that through the DOE website to find an ability to work with our State Board of Education as well. And I thank you for letting me speak here tonight.
Thank you. Ms. Robbins.
Okay. We have heard tonight how these standards resulted from a state-led process, and Senator Liggin talked a little bit about that. One thing that we need to keep in mind is that these standards were written by 5 people. There were different people whose names were on the list of the people who were going to give input, but everybody agrees they were written by 5 people. 2 people wrote the English Language Arts Standards, 3 people wrote the math standards. Not a single one of those people was from Georgia. The validation committee was clearly intended to be a rubber stamp. They were not intended to improve the standards, they were intended to sign off on them. And they picked people that they knew would do that, except they made the mistake of picking Sandy Stotsky and Jim Milgram, who were the 2 people who knew more. They were the content experts and they knew more than anybody in the room, but they refused to sign off because they thought the standards were abysmal. Even if it had been a state-led process, so what? Why should people in California or New York be telling us what we're going to teach in our schools, what our standards are going to be? The idea that we can just go in with all these other governors, I would love to know how many of these governors even knew this was going on. The National Governors Association is essentially a networking organization. But if we want to do something, go in with the other states and do something, our founders set up a procedure for doing that. It's called Congress. This violates that. It bypasses Congress. Now we have to answer to some private organization that is funded heavily by the federal government, by the way, and the Gates Foundation. And they're the ones who are dictating what we're going to be doing with our standards. I don't think that's acceptable. This is a workforce development scheme. That's all it is. It's workforce development. And I agree that people need to be ready for jobs. But I suggest that if you give people classical education, they are automatically ready for jobs. It's when you start just trying to train them for jobs that you don't really accomplish what you're going to do. At this conference that I attended on Monday, one of the speakers was Dr. Bud Peterson, who is the president of Georgia Tech. And he was not talking about Common Core, he was talking generally about higher education, but he did mention what you needed to do in high school. And I was writing furiously as he was saying this, because bear in mind that Common Core moves Algebra 1 to 9th grade. It includes only up to Algebra 2. It does not go beyond that. And even the people at the College Board have said, well, we're going to drop AP Calculus because you don't need it anymore in Common Core. So Dr. Peterson said, not even thinking about Common Core when he said it, I'm sure, that if you want to go to Georgia Tech, you have to have had Algebra 1 by 8th grade and continue through and have calculus as a senior. The vast majority of students in Georgia under Common Core will not be there, and they won't be going to Georgia Tech. This is what we have sold our educational birthright for, because this was some compromise deal that came out of people that yes, we had a seat at the table, I guess, but we didn't control it. If it were in Georgia, we would control it. When we signed up for the Race to the Top money, we signed up to implement internationally benchmarked standards. These standards are not internationally benchmarked. They don't even claim anymore that they're internationally benchmarked. Now they say, well, they're informed by the standards of high-achieving countries, but we don't know what that means. We've asked for the reports. Give us the benchmarking reports. They've never even identified the countries that they benchmark them to. So what we signed up for Race to the Top, it turned out not to be true. What they gave us was not what we agreed to implement. So, thank you for your interest in this. I hope that you will take the next step. I hope that if you're concerned about this, that you will call the governor, that you will call the lieutenant governor, that you will call people in the legislature, because they have the power to do something about this, to get us out of it. But they need to hear what the problems are, and we're doing our best, and people across the state are working to make sure that they understand what people's concerns are. Thank you.
I'll just help with a couple of clarifications.
Just a minute. This is Senator Miller's 5-minute closing statement.
Okay.
Let's just leave it at that.
That's fine.
Yeah.
That's no problem. Well, I'm glad we had this discussion tonight, number one. Number two, I'm a little bit surprised that after over an hour and a half, we've never heard the word Obama Corps. So we must be making some progress. I guess that hasn't been said at all. You know, I think what's important here is that we can have these kind of discussions. Senator Liggett and I have had these discussions numerous times, and I think at this point in time, you have to remember one thing. We talk about these standards, and I heard somebody say something about voting on the standards or this type of thing. We never voted on the Georgia Performance Standards. They were promulgated by the Department of Education. And the standards that come through in the state are voted on by the Department of Education. State board, when I say, excuse me, the State Board of Education. So the Georgia Performance Standards, which we had for the last 8 years before this legislature never voted on it. I believe in Common Core. I think maybe 4 legislatures actually voted on it. I do agree with William. I think the legislature it'd be nice if we were more involved in some things, whether it's Common Core, et cetera, but that's not how it's been handled in the past, and that's where we are today. I do think your governor has tried to alleviate concerns. You know, he's talked about things that he ordered, that no education standards should be imposed on Georgia by the federal government. He said that all decisions with curriculum and instruction would be made at the local level. And probably one thing that didn't come up tonight, because it's been, I guess, proven that it's not fact, that no personal identifiable data on students and or their family's religion, political party, biometric, psychometric, and other voting history should be collected, tracked, housed, reported, or shared with the federal government. That's all part of his executive order. And you may see some legislation going forward. This is a moving process. I think it's good that we have dialogue on it. I said this at the beginning. Common Core is not a magic bullet. I want you to think about something. Those of you with kids, those of you with grandkids, whether we like it or not, it's already been stated that the measurements for these kids to get into colleges and universities down the road, right now, they're saying they're going to include the standards from Common Core. Now, you may not like that, but that's what's being said right now by the people at ACT, SAT, etc. So, right now, I'm not saying go along, get along. That's not what I'm saying. And nobody talked about, in each state, we have up to 15% flexibility in these standards. Go look at the Georgia Public Policy Foundation paper on this. 90% of the math is Georgia Performance Standard. 81% was the English Language Arts. Okay? You got 15% flexibility to do the math. So, you know, again, I think some of the things that are going good out of the Common Core, critical thinking, research skills, applying real-world knowledge, okay, to the real world, that you can use these type of things. So, like I said, there's no magic answer here. Greatly appreciate your time tonight. I hope you're all ready for Georgia Tech versus Virginia Tech. And again, I would like to thank again Michael, Republican Party here. Doctor, I'd like to thank you for being a moderator. And good evening.
Let me just close by saying that I think most people in the room would agree that our educational system is in need of drastic reform. And to my mind, the issue at hand is which system gets us there best and fastest. And I think there's a lot of interesting things presented, a lot to think about. Thank you very much, and happy birthday to Virginia Gal.